All right. Well, welcome back to another episode of Feminists Watching Television. I'm Kelsey, and I'm a feminist who likes to watch television.
I'm Leona, and I am also a feminist who likes to watch television.
Okay, today we're going to talk about the show that's on everyone's minds, Game of Thrones. And before we really get into it, let's talk a little bit about whether or not we think Game of Thrones is a feminist show. And I will say that I don't always think it's a feminist show, but that doesn't mean that as feminists who like television, there isn't a lot for us to talk about. So since we're still kind of early in our feminist watching television game, Leona, why don't you talk to us a little bit about what you consider, what makes a feminist show for you, and how does Game of Thrones fit into that?
Thanks, Kelsey. I've been thinking about this a lot. Is there a fairly equal split in the genders represented in the primary cast, especially? And are the women who are included fully fleshed out characters, individuals, not just projections of the male characters or stereotypes, but something individual, something unique? And I feel like Game of Thrones would qualify because, especially now, I feel like this season more than ever, it's like somebody got a memo that people like the female characters.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. When it comes to Game of Thrones, what I think stops me from giving it a feminist stamp of approval, not as a viewer, I watch every week, I like the show, but just like would I consider it a feminist program, is that it feels very male gazy to me still. It feels like the audience that the producers have in mind is a male audience, and that even the way that they are sort of serving up the women characters to us, who I love, I mean, there's a lot to like, feels very much like, hey men, hey straight men, are you watching? I have no problem with a show that's sexual and has sexualized characters, and I think Game of Thrones works sex into its plots in a way that, that fits. I don't feel as a female viewer like I'm being considered, and that is something that matters to me when I'm kind of thinking about what makes a feminist show.
Let's be fair, there are some gratuitous sex scenes that involve homosexual men having intercourse, which I think it's like, hey, all men. So, definitely inclusive on the male gazy gratuitous sex front.
So this season on Game of Thrones, I think the female characters have a lot going on. I love seeing, their plots develop. I think it's really exciting that a lot of the episodes we've seen recently have really foregrounded the women, because those are the characters I find most interesting. So I thought today we could just kind of check in with some of our favorite women Game of Thrones characters, give our takes on kind of what they're up to and what we think's coming up for them, and go from there. So do you want to get us started with, one of the Stark sisters?
I do, but I kind of want to address the controversy that we're bringing to this episode up front.
Okay.
We think Daenerys is super boring on the show, and we're not going to talk about her today. She's not on our list.
Sorry, Mother of Dragons fans, but every time we go to Marine, I'm looking at my phone. I'm just not that interested.
I don't even go. I fast forward through those scenes. Let's talk about the Stark sisters. Arya and Sansa. They're an interesting study in contrast, and the contrast is less stark in the show than it is in the books, but what it boils down to is when they're little girls, Sansa believes that if she adheres to all of the social norms for their class and their gender, those social norms will protect her. And Sansa believes that Arya's reluctance to adhere to those same social norms and standards is going to be a liability to her. Sansa's belief is proven false, unreliable, over and over and over again. Every person she trusts betrays her. Every time she does the good girl thing, it blows up in her face. Well, Arya, from day one, is mastering sword fighting and wearing pants and going on the run as a boy. And now she's training to be an assassin and has allied herself with people who are not of her class, who don't have any of the same aspirations that her sister has or that they were raised to have. And although she's been in peril over and over again during the show, she never seems like a victim to me. So I think those two characters present a very interesting contrast within that world, but also within the world.
I think that's a really great point. I would argue, though, that Sansa, with her new physical look and her new outlook on life, I mean, we've seen her, she's dyed her hair black. She's kind of going through a goth phase with her uncle Littlefinger. It seems like she's deciding, you know what, I'm going to take my situation, I'm going to take charge of my situation. I'm not surrendering to these norms anymore. And I got the sense, now, keep in mind, I haven't read the book, so I don't know what's going to happen, but that she's positioning herself to get some power and to possibly take revenge for some murders, just like her sister Arya has been trying to do.
Yeah, maybe she's going to take some revenge for some murders.
Anyone on the show could take revenge for some murders at this point.
Let's all take revenge for some murders.
Well, I'd like to chime in with a couple more characters that I think offer an interesting kind of contrast, but in a different way, which is Marjorie and Cersei. And I think that they are basically a younger and older version of a similar character, which is a woman who is very intelligent, who has a lot to offer, who is in a situation where she is confined by her gender and the men around her who make decisions for her and hold the power for her. All they have is their ability to relate to the men in their lives, either through marriage or through motherhood or through, you know, siblinghood or whatever allegiances they can have to men. And as Cersei has more and more of those relationships taken away from her through murder, some of which she's orchestrated and some of which has been orchestrated by other people around her, you know, she's getting pretty desperate. And I think it's interesting to see a character like that, who I know isn't on her face the most likable. She has a lot of bad qualities, but I do think she's smart. And I think that if things were more equal in Westeros, that she'd be in charge instead of her 15-year-old son, who she's kind of trying to guide from behind the scenes. And now he has this wife who she's at odds with. And I just think that I really like their interactions. Maybe it's because I like those actors, but I also think that it really speaks to the ways in which women can operate sort of behind the scenes to gain power when traditionally they're not supposed to have any.
What a dreadful situation.
It really is a rough situation. Yeah. I mean, probably getting together with your twin brother wasn't a good idea, but it's not helping things at this point, that's for sure.
The other two female characters that we wanted to talk about today are a good contrast as well. They are Brienne of Tarth and Stannis Baratheon's daughter, Shireen, whose name I have to look up every time I want to say it. They have a lot of similarities as well, because Brienne recounted the tale of her father setting up a ball for her and all of the suitors coming and charming her and her being on top of the world until she realized that they were all making jokes behind her back and that their affection was for their own amusement, that they were insincere in their kindness with her, except Renly Baratheon, and that's why she was so devoted to him. And she has been shaped by her perception that she is physically repulsive. And Stannis' daughter, Shireen, has the grayscale remnants on her face and has basically been raised in a tower where nobody can see her hideous face, and is kind and sympathetic and spends her time teaching other people to read. But also, her psyche is totally being shaped by the fact that she's programmed to believe she's so physically repulsive she needs to be kept under wraps. So these two women are developing their strengths from a place of shame.
That's a really interesting correlation. And I think both of those characters, especially Brienne, but arguably Shireen too, if they were males, they would have a lot more options. The fact that they don't look the way the people around them want them to look, or they don't give off a feminine enough vibe, or their skin's not perfect enough, means they have to find other ways to live their lives, you know, kind of outside of those norms. If Shireen was a boy, Stannis would let her out of the tower sometimes. But since she's a girl, she can't leave the tower. And, you know, Brienne is somebody that a lot of people look to as a real anomaly or even a freak, just because she doesn't have a very feminine vibe, and she's chosen a career path as a knight or a wannabe knight that is not something that very many women go for. It's exciting to see these women carving paths for themselves where it's hard to do that. You know, that's one of the things I really like about these characters on the show.
I feel like it's worth pointing out that although the 6 characters that we focused on in this conversation are all upper class, facilitates their freedom to make choices within the limitations that none of their choices are easy, for sure. There are other women who get screen time in the show without it being because they are the daughters of nobility or ascending through the class structure. Definitely the privilege of being in the upper class assists the women that we've talked about with their tasks, such as they are.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. You know, money certainly helps on Game of Thrones, just like it does in a lot of situations. And they are all upper class women.
Like you, I enjoy the show. I am tuning in. I'm watching all the episodes. I'm part of the audience. I think that the reason these women, these characters, are being held up as so great is that there aren't enough of them on TV in general. And, you know, when was the last time there was a popular show from the Dungeons and Dragons ilk, from that of the kings and queens era, that had kick-ass women in it? And I think Xena Warrior Princess is probably the last time it happened. What we should see here is evidence that women want to watch something like this, be represented in this way, put on medieval clothes and go kick ass and do these things. This is refreshing in the way that being handed a Coke when you're parched in the desert is refreshing. There's nothing else to drink and you're super thirsty. And so this tastes amazing, but water would be better. So it would be great if there was more to choose from.
But still very interesting to watch. I will continue to tune in this season to see what happens with all of the characters. And we would certainly invite anyone watching this to join in the comments and say, you know, what do you think about the women on Game of Thrones? Who did we leave out that you want to talk about? Maybe you find Daenerys Targaryen, you know, endlessly fascinating and you want to tell us about it. We'll probably skim over your comments because she's such a snooze fest, but you're welcome for the internet to read.